Hello friends, in this video I am going to teach you about what is directional coupler. A directional coupler is one of the microwave junctions in microwave engineering. It is used to split the microwave energy and it is also used to measure the voltage standing wave ratio, incident power, reflected power and forward and backward powers. In this video I am going to explain you each and everything about the directional coupler and the properties of the directional coupler. Now let's see a directional coupler. Here it is the direction coupler having the four ports. It is port 1 and it is the port 2, it is port 3 and final one is port 4. It is how the directional coupler looks like. Now let's see the diagrammatical representation of directional coupler having four ports. Here observe it is port 1 and it is port 2. This port 1 and port 2 are existing in the main waveguide. Okay, so we call these two ports are collinear ports, and port 3 and port 4 are with auxiliary waveguide. So we can call this port 3 and port 4 are auxiliary ports. Here observe when the power is incident at port 1. Suppose if I am giving the power at port 1, that is PI. PI is nothing but incident power. Someone we call it is a input power also. Okay, it is incident power. When I give incident power as Pi at port 1, then the received power at port 2 is PR. PR is nothing but received power at port 2. And here PF and PD also there. PF is nothing but forward power and PB is nothing but backward power. Here forward power is nothing but when the power is incident at port 1, how much power is coupled to the port 4 is nothing but forward power. If suppose if I passed a microwave signal at port 1 and how much microwave signal is delivered to the port 4 is nothing but forward power, and how much microwave signal is delivered to the port 3 is nothing but backward power, and how much microwave signal is going forward and reached to the port 2 is nothing but received power. And these are the four ports, and this is how the power is splitting in directional coupler. And here we can observe there are four ports. When we incident a power at port 1, then the power is splits between the port 2 and port 4. Even no power is entered to the port 3. Okay, so we call this port 3 as a isolated port. What? Isolated port, because when we incident a power at port 1, the power is delivered at the port 2 and port 4, not at the port 3. And similarly, here observe, similarly, when we incident a power at port 2, this port 2 power is delivered to the port 1 and port 3, not to the port 4. Here in this case, port 4 is called as a isolated port, and the power delivered at port 4, port 3 is nothing but forward power. Okay, it is in ideal case, but practically some amount of small amount of power is delivered to the port 3 and port 4 also. If I incident a power at port 1, in ideal case the power is delivered between port 2 and port 4, but in practically there is a small amount of power is delivered to the port 3 also. Okay, and when I incident a power at port 2, wait, when I incident a power at port 2, this power is delivered to the port 1 and port 3 ideally, but practically some amount of few power is delivered to the port 4 also. And this is how the directional coupler works. Now let's see a few more points. That is, a directional coupler is a device that samples a small amount of microwave power for measurement purpose. This microwave directional coupler is used to sample a small amount of power. Here we already observed it is used to split the entire microwave power into three parts. Here we got a maximum amount of power at port 2, and port 3 and port 4 having minimum amount of power. When we incident a power at port 1, there is a very little amount of power is present at port 3 and small amount of power is present at port 4. This is how we sample the microwave power, and we can measure the what called voltage standing wave ratio and the power what is in different ports. And the power measurement includes incident power, reflected power, and VSWR is nothing but voltage standing wave ratios. Okay, and directional coupler is a four-port waveguide junction consisting of a primary waveguide and secondary auxiliary waveguide. You know, it is a four-port waveguide. It is having a main waveguide and auxiliary waveguide. Main waveguide is having the two ports, that is port 1 and port 2, and auxiliary waveguide is having the two ports, that is port 3 and port 4. Okay, now let's see some of the properties of an ideal directional coupler. Okay, what are the properties of ideal directional coupler? Let's see. In ideal directional coupler, all the terminals are matched to the ports. We know here we have four ports and all the terminals are perfectly matched to all the ports. Okay, and when the power travels from port 1 to port 2, some portion of it gets coupled to the port 4 but not to the port 3. I already told you when we are discussed at the diagram itself, when we incident a power at port 2, the port 2 power is not port 2, port 1 power is delivered to the port 2 and port 4 but not to the port 3, because the port 3 is an isolated port. But practically a small amount of power is delivered to the port 3 also, but it is in the case of ideal case. Here we are considering the properties in case of ideal, so there is no power is delivered to the port 3 in case of ideal. And let's see, as it also a bidirectional coupler, it acts as a bidirectional coupler also, because it in two directionals it couples the power. Okay, when we incident a power at port 1, it couples that incident power to the port 2 as well as port 4. That's why we call it as a bidirectional coupler. When the power travels from port 2 to port 1, some portion of it gets coupled to port 3 but not to port 2. Okay, as like a second point, it is also similar to second point. When we incident a power at port 2, then that power is coupled to the port 1 and port 3, not to the port 4. That means no power is delivered to the port 4 when we incident a power at port 2. Now, if power is incident through port 3, a portion of it is coupled to port 2 but not port 1. It is also similar to the previous points only. Once if you get clarified in the diagrammatical diagram of directional coupler, then you can write this all the points in your own way. Okay. If the power is incident through port 4, the portion of it is get coupled to the port 1 but not port 2. Here port 4 is nothing but forward power port. When we incident a power at port 1, the port 4 is nothing but forward power delivered port. When we incident a power at port 4, a portion of power is coupled to the port 1 but not port 2. Here port 2 act as a isolated port. Okay, and this is about the properties of ideal directional coupler. I hope you understood this topic. Thank you for watching this video. Please do subscribe and like to this video. Thank you.